For our final presentation, the topic our group is presenting on is Polarization and the 2024 election, with insights provided by Reddit. The topics this presentation will go through are our research proposal, then the methods, our data set, the cleaning process of the data set, the results, and lastly, the analysis. For our research proposal, we wanted to study the question, how can Reddit data from politically affiliated subreddits inform our understanding of emotional shifts and political polarization both before and after the 2024 election? For our intended goal, we wanted to compute the overall changes in sentiment of pre- and post-election results from the subreddits Democrat and Conservative. We would train a support vector machine model to classify the political stance, either far left or far right, of the Reddit posts. And then we would examine the pre-election and post-election result changes for each stance in the total amount, word usage, and sentiments. We will visualize this through bar charts and word clouds. Our intended customer would be media outlets. So journalists and editorial teams that are covering political news could leverage our Reddit insights to craft user-based and data-forward stories about public sentiment and political polarization. Our research would help them do things such as examining trends and voter attitudes leading up to and after the election results, have easy-to-understand visual graphics that are just at a glance understood by most viewers, and create discussions around societal divisions based on political affiliation and the implications for democracy as a result.
Our analytical methods for this project were first a bag of words text analysis, which we used to find the most common word frequencies and analyze the word associations. And the output from this technique was used to create a word cloud so that we could quickly analyze what were the most common words, judging from the size of the words. The next thing that we used was an Afinn lexicon to judge the sentiment scores for the words involved. This numeric sentiment scoring was able to capture the shifts in sentiment both pre and post-election and look into the extreme sentiments for the keywords. The next method that we used was a support vector machine, an SVM, which was used to classify political stance for far left versus far right. And the variables were titles, texts from our Democrats and our conservative subreddits. And this let us look into a deeper analysis of sentiment and language, both pre and post-election, from each side of the political spectrum. And this information was then used to perform a sentiment analysis using the NRC lexicon to track any emotional shifts across the Democrat and Republican / conservative spectrum specifically. And we were able to find that there was very specific emotional shifts from training that SVM model. After some discussion, we decided that our best visualization methods for this project were going to be word clouds because they allowed us to look at the keywords specifically segmented by subreddit and time period. And the output with the font size dedicated to term frequency allowed us to visually see the common terms and emotional triggers and see which ones were the most common, because the most common ones were going to be the largest ones in the word cloud. And this simplified the insights from both the sentiment analysis and the SVM predictions. The other visualization method that we used were bar charts. The variables that we put into these were the emotions from the NRC analysis and the individual words from the text analysis. The output were the counts of comments by emotion, subreddit, time period, and word frequency charts. And the reason we used this was because we were looking primarily at categorical variables, and we wanted a clear comparison of those variables and their emotional shifts over time. And we were looking to we were looking to visualize these trends for our customer, the media audience, so that we can interpret those easily.
Our team used the free Reddit API to extract data from JSON files. With it, I pulled 3 datasets: 24 hours before the election results with 850 posts, 24 hours after the election results with 1,070 posts, and then train data with 7,000 post observations. A few descriptive analytics on the 24 hours before results is that there was 860 unique titles and 293 unique body texts. The average title had 77 characters and the average body had 232 characters. So for the before and after data sets, I used a myriad of political and 2024 election keywords with pagination to search through the Our Politics, Our Political Discussion, and a general search subreddit. I then used time filtering to extract the relevant data points. The train data was queried through a similar approach, but only through Our Democrat and Our Conservative. Time was set to include all posts from the last month. To clean these datasets, I started by joining the text and body columns and removing duplicate rows to ensure our results were an accurate representation of the datasets. I then applied a few common mapping functions to modify the text observations by converting them to lowercase, removing punctuation, removing numbers, and removing common English words. These steps were taken on each dataset to ensure the data was ready for the various text mining techniques we used. The SVM trained data required a few more pre-processing steps. To garner better results, I applied word stemming to the train and test sets to decrease feature space noise. These were converted to DTMs with TF-IDF weighting. I used TF-IDF so that the SVM model would focus on the more important terms. I also reduced the sparsity to increase efficiency and decrease noise. I had to apply these same techniques to the before and after datasets in order to balance them and apply the model.
And now for the results and analysis of our dataset.
It's important to note the broader context leading up to the 2024 election. Although these years were marked by deep polarization and cultural shifts following Trump's first term in office. And Trump's first term and his ongoing influence and multiple criminal charges following his first term created a divide between anyone seeking a return to order and normal political operating procedure and his base, and those fearing the erosion of democratic norms. Particularly, minority groups, women, and immigrants increasingly voiced fears of marginalization amid the rising rhetoric around traditionalism, nationalism, and anti-progressivism, especially LGBTQ and the transgender community were especially getting a particularly large amount of focus from Trump's base during these years. And online spaces saw a resurgence of misogynistic and anti-intellectual movements, which were epitomized by narratives like "Your Body, My Choice" after the fall of Roe v. Wade, and the rise of the tradwife influencer on TikTok. With the anti-intellectual movement, we would hear terms like fake news and elite bias, which fueled a mistrust of any scientific findings or academic perspective. And it's important to note here, this is not the first time that this anti-intellectual movement has happened. This happened before and during the McCarthy era after World War II. So this is an interesting perspective to have, that it is history repeating itself. Now Harris versus Trump 2.0 for his second run in office. Harris is a college-educated BIPOC woman, and therefore she embodies what are progressive ideals. But she did face layered challenges of racism, sexism, and basically what is the conservative ideal, which does embrace those traditional movements of gender ideals where it is a traditional man and woman, and they do espouse Christian America as their way of living. So she was very much not what the Trump base would have wanted in office. And so these are the dynamics that set the stage for the election in 2024, where each side had very different ideas for what America's future should look like. Text analysis indicates that prior to the election, Trump pretty much dominated Reddit discourse. He had significantly more mentions than Harris, and of course, this doesn't tell us whether the mentions were positive or negative, simply that his frequency of mentions were higher. There were also some key terms that came out before the election, like vote and election, which suggests that there was a high mobilization of both parties to get out their voters to vote for their preferred candidate. The term vote through the Find associations was also linked to debates about voter fraud, which has been a Republican focus for years, and voter suppression and the ability to vote, which is a Democratic concern, which shows some of the polarization of this election and the discussions around it. Other findings showed that not only was Trump mentioned significantly more, but after the election, his mentions surged while Kamala's pretty much dropped back to almost nothing. New terms after the election that we see appear in the word clouds are president, Democrats, and women. And these show that there are some shifts in focus for people's attention. Fear certainly became a dominant theme, especially for minorities, women, and immigrants. We say this especially in the Find associations analysis, where we see concerns about safety and rights for immigrants and women around their ability to stay in the country, to receive critical medical care, and in the LGBTQ community to not only receive medical care, but just for their personal safety. And there have been discussions online about people moving abroad to maintain their safety and simply to access basic services. Now, for Harris, sentiments before the election were extremely hopeful, with words like proud and being used to very analytical words, indicating that she was well educated, and people may have considered her to be the better candidate for the office, at least on the Democratic side. To after the election, words like resentment, intersectional, internecine, racism, and it looks like the shift was to exploring reasons for her loss that included structural racism and sexism. When I created a chart of common terms and their change before and after the election, we see some of the trends that I just discussed. We see the term election surges ever so slightly after the election, and I think this is due to people analyzing the election results. We see that Harris is a term drops as opposed to her pre-election mentions. We see the word just, and we see that surge well above where it was at before the election. The term Kamala actually it takes a bump above where it was in the before category. And that's interesting given that Harris is a term that dropped. So I think that after the election, there may have been some, I don't know, maybe loss of respect, and people stopped using her last name and started referring to her by her first name. Um, this may also be reflective of the winning party, who I know from interacting with some of their the members of that party, they never refer to her as Vice President Harris. They always refer to her by her first name. Um, and then we see the term like. I don't know what this refers to be quite honest. I couldn't parse out any of the associations attached to it, but we do see that takes a bump after the election. The term people actually takes a huge bump after the election, and I think that this may reflect um, kind of some of the analysis around, what was going on, what were people doing, how were they voting, and then here is the huge surge in the mentions of Trump, both before and after the election, which honestly is to be expected. Anytime we have a winning party in an election, they're going to get a lot of mentions after an election. And then we see vote takes a huge drop after the election, and this is kind of an expected trend. And then the last common word between the two sets of data was the word will. And again, was another one I'm not entirely sure. I wasn't entirely sure how to parse out the associations with this one, but it took a huge bump after the election, and I actually wondered if this had to do with people discussing what they're going to do, what they will do, or the will of the people with the election. There was a lot of discussions post-election about um, people making plans for what they're going to do for the next 4 years, at least on the Democratic side of things. And then on the Republican side of things, there was discussions about this being the mandate that the president has to work the will of the people. That was the theme that I was hearing come out of the media. So overall, we see a significant decrease in vote, a significant increase in Trump and people. He is considered a people's candidate, so that does sort of make some sense. And pretty much with Harris, we see that it's nearly equal, but she did take a little bit of a drop there. The sentiment analysis revealed some significant emotional trends during the election, which was not surprising given the very polarized nature going into this election. Before the election, terms like Vote Blue scored a plus 131, while Harris Walls had a plus 153. And they carried some very strong positive sentiment, which reflects Democratic optimism going into the election. And there was some very negative sentiment surrounding Republican related terms, like Trump, which scored negative 27, and Trump Vance, um, which had a negative 77. Now, while these aren't very strong negative sentiments compared to the very positive sentiments connected to the Democratic campaign, it does suggest some criticism and apprehension related to the Democratic candidates. Now, swing states were a major focus in this campaign, and they did come up in the sentiment analysis with frequent mentions and associated sentiment scores. After the election, there was quite a swing in the sentiment around the Trump 2024 keyword. It went from being rather low to an extremely high sentiment at 182. Which indicated to me a celebration among Trump supporters. Um, Vote Blue swung negative from the plus 131 to a negative number, and I would tend to think that's indicative of disappointment and disillusionment, as well as quite a bit of frustration. I know that throughout the the media and the general sentiment was a lot of shock and frustration with losing the campaign. The word campaign itself scored highly negative after the election, which I think captures the widespread dissatisfaction on both sides of the aisle with the election process itself. Generally speaking, as I speak with people about politics who are both a Republican and Democrat, as well as independents, people are frustrated with how elections are run. And this does seem to show up in the sentiment analysis on Reddit. Given the extremely emotional and polarized nature of the election, I thought it was worthwhile to explore the extreme sentiments. So we set up a filter that it looked at the sentiment scores for any terms that were greater than 4 or less than 4. And what I found were terms that were either derogatory terms that were clearly directed at a candidate or very emotional terms that looked like they were reflecting sentiment like celebration or sentiments that were reflecting disappointment. So on the positive side of things, and these are sentiments that are greater than 4, I found terms like awesome, win, winning, amazing, which reflect excitement and celebration. Although I will note that sometimes amazing and winner, things like that, can be used with a sarcastic or negative content. And the example that I will give is sometimes somebody could say something like, it's amazing how people can vote that way. On the negative side, I found quite a few derogatory terms as well as swear words, very strong negative terms like fucked, shit, hell, which were clearly expressing disappointment and anger about the election results. I also found terms which were clearly referencing Trump, like fraud, fraudster, rapist, which obviously reference his ongoing criminal proceedings. I found some terms that, through my text analysis, I know are related to Harris. These terms are things like bitch and cunt, which are generally terms that are applied in a derogatory manner to any female. Going back to the positive side, though, I did find some really interesting positive terms for that were misapplied. One of the things that I found was stunned and stunning were misapplied. I know that one of the terms that was being frequently used for the election results was people were stunned, and that was not being used in a positive way. But the sentiment scoring scored it as a positive word. So the chart I created obviously shows the positive and negative sentiments along the same line, but you do have to look at the actual word itself and consider it in its context.
After preparing the data, I started to build the model. I tried a few different combinations of hyperparameters. The best performing model used the radial kernel with the C-support vector classification type. I got a boost in prediction accuracy with the radial kernel over the linear kernel, showing that the data was not linearly separable. I used a cost rating of 1 to create a more general model, as it will be applied to data it was not trained on. In retrospect, I should have also applied k-crossfold validation to increase the generality and decrease the error rate. Overall, my model performed decently. There's definitely room for improvement, possibly through feature engineering techniques like PCA, a larger dataset, and advanced hyperparameter tuning. That said, my model achieved an accuracy of 75%. To check that my model picked up on useful features and used them appropriately, I looked at the p-value, kappa score, and McNemar's test. The p-value was 2e-16, which shows that my model successfully picked up on features that led to accurate predictions and was not led by random chance. The kappa was 0.48. This is important to mention as my dataset was slightly skewed with the predominant conservative class, which the kappa score accounts for. In agreement with the p-value, the kappa shows that there was a moderate agreement between the predicted and actual labels, beyond only chance. The McNamar's test resulted in a value of 0.33, meaning that there is no significant difference in the misclassification rate, being either false positives or false negatives. Basically, when the model is unsure, its unsureness is not heavily skewed to a certain class. The model correctly predicted 81% of Republican posts and only 67% of Democratic posts. This difference was most likely caused by dataset imbalance, where I had 3,300 conservative posts and 2,200 Democrat posts. To mitigate this, I applied a class weights parameter, which penalizes misclassifications for the Democrat class in hopes of making the model work harder to correctly classify Democratic posts. Two potential issues may explain the class prediction accuracy difference. First, the larger conservative dataset allowed the model to better learn patterns in conservative word usage. Second, shared terminology between the classes could have caused intermingling of predictive features, making it harder to distinguish Democratic posts. Since the McNamar's test showed that the misclassification rates were not statistically significant from each other, such that the intermingling of features did not cause a skew towards the conservative class, this suggests that the larger conservative dataset provided an advantage in learning patterns rather than systemic confusion from shared features. While class balancing helps, the motto that there's no replacement for displacement stands true, and thus increasing the size of the Democrat dataset should address this discrepancy. After applying the model to the before and after datasets, I saw that the model accurately predicted the more simple and direct posts. However, when the text data lacked features or is abstract, it tended to get confused. Some posts also lack a clear stance or are just straight gibberish. A future rendition may use multinomial classification or a threshold requirement alongside a third class of independent or unsure.
When looking at the NRC lexicon results, it's important to note that there are more instances in the after-election datasets, so inherently all the emotions have a higher number of occurrences. When we rank the emotions in most to least number of occurrences, we see this order: positivity, trust, negativity, anticipation, anger, joy, surprisal, sadness, fear, and disgust. So the top two emotions really show us that regardless of the election, there is overall positivity and trust in the election results, in the process of the election, and just in people's individual parties. With the next three that we see, negativity, anticipation, and anger, do show some sort of polarization that come after that blanket positivity and trust. Anger specifically is a very strong marker of polarization. People can be angry in the opposite party. People can be angry with how their party is acting. Just shows a really strong emotion and a really strong feeling. Negativity also helps to this polarization, though negativity is a more general emotion. People could be negative about just the general atmosphere as well, but we see that, again, this is weaker than the general positivity. When it comes to just the Democrat side of things, what we see in emotions is an increase in disgust, fear, negativity, and surprise. Now, the increase in disgust could show dissatisfaction with the election outcomes, like disappointment with the winning party. Fear could show concerns about the implication of the election results. Negativity could show just a general sense of discontent with the results as the losing party, and surprisal as it's just something that no one was really expecting, as of course in the Democratic Party many people were expecting for their own party to win. We saw a decrease in the following emotions: anticipation, joy, sadness, and trust. So a decrease in anticipation is just natural following the election results being shown. A decrease in joy shows less celebration, less celebratory sentiment, also tied to general fear of disappointment. A decrease in sadness could be because their emotions are now being shifted to more active ones, less passive ones like sadness. And then a decrease in trust could show less trust in the election, but it also could show no trust for the party that's won to lead the country. When it comes to the Republican NRC analysis, we still see the same dominant emotions of positivity, trust, and negativity, but when it comes to the temporal shift, we see that emotions remained a bit more stable than the Democratic side. So what we do see is a slight increase in the negativity and a slight decrease in joy, anticipation, and trust, which may counter what we're expecting, but there are a bit more complexities behind the Republican side than what we looked at in the Democratic side. So a lot of people who could be in the Republican Party may not agree with the elected candidate. So this could show the dissatisfaction or frustration that comes with a decrease in joy and trust. The decrease in anticipation is again to be expected post-election results. But when it comes to an increase in negativity, people could be more critical of the elected candidate. So while there is a general satisfaction with the election results, seen also with the more stable emotions, there are complexities behind the emotions that we do see. And lastly, we have some further conclusionary analysis for our project. So to recap, our goal for this project is to analyze sentiment trends and predict political leanings of Reddit posts surrounding the 2024 election. And we met this goal. Some of our successes include the fact that we were able to capture sentiment shifts before and after the election, and also that our SVM model achieved a 75% accuracy in political prediction. Some challenges, though, was the fact that the nuance in text was difficult to detect or just went unaccounted for. Some patterns we noticed are sentiment patterns. So the NRC noticed that positivity and trust were prominent emotions regardless of the election results. And the Afinn sentiment patterns showed strong changes in negativity and positivity both before and after the election. The practical meaning behind this is that emotional shifts reflect public sentiment and the acceptance of political outcomes, and that machine learning models definitely need refinement to be able to handle nuanced language features. For the real world, why this matters, because it helps policymakers, researchers, and media companies understand public discourse, and it provides insights into political polarization and sentiment trends. Some applications include the fact that we can use it to predict public acceptance of policies or events. We can use it to monitor and address misinformation and harmful content online. We can use it to support strategists in creating targeted communication campaigns, or you can use social media as a potential predictive tool for election outcomes. And lastly, some limitations. So the study faced limitations such as class imbalance, which led to better prediction accuracy for Republican posts, and shared terminology between political groups can make it hard for the model to distinguish between the two. Some future improvements include using a more diverse data set, incorporating advanced sentiment analysis methods, and applying cross-validation for more robust results. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening.